When I began to see the world through the eyes of a player, everything suddenly took on a new light. Ordinary conversations turned into chess matches, handshakes concealed hidden agendas, and the silence of someone in a meeting room rang out like a strategic signal. One particular line from the book made me pause for a long time. This book is not about war, nor is it a guide on how to get rich quick. It reveals the art of deciphering the underlying rhythms in what we perceive as familiar. A football match, a negotiation, a vote, or even a fleeting glance between two strangers. The authors do not merely try to teach us how to win in the conventional sense. They expose the naked essence of the games that we, whether we like it or not, participate in every day. They tell of a man on a deserted island who intentionally yielded during a physical challenge to earn the ultimate right to survive. They tell of a penalty kicker who, standing only 11 meters from the goal, must learn the necessity of being unpredictable. They tell of leaders who burned their bridges, chaining themselves to a single path to force others to comply. And they even tell of the smartest individuals who became victims of the winner's curse, overpaying only to receive regret in return. Reading these stories, we realize a strange truth. Humans do not always function like rational machines. Sometimes we accept meaningless pain just to prove loyalty. Sometimes we ruin a collective opportunity out of fear that others will gain more. Sometimes we must do things that seem counterintuitive, accepting defeat, tying our own hands, or sowing uncertainty to pave the way for long-term victory. The question I want to pose to you is, in the games you live every day within your family, on the streets, or at the workplace, are you the one defining the rules, or just someone unconsciously following the rules set by others? If one move could change the entire match, would you be alert enough to recognize it and brave enough to execute it? The book does not offer polished slogans, but forces us to face a gritty reality. Every human relationship is a strategic game, and if we fail to see it, we will forever remain pawns in someone else's. So, do you choose to be a pawn or a player? Before diving into the review, we encourage listeners to buy and read the book to fully experience its depth. Only by reading the entire work will you truly understand the nuances of the stories I am sharing. Please support the author by purchasing the book. Now, let us begin our exploration. A small, seemingly harmless game can reveal an entire world of strategic thinking. Imagine someone tells you, "I'd have chosen a number from 1 to 100. Guess it." If you guess correctly on the first try, you get a reward. It sounds simple. Instinctively, you might split the difference to narrow the margin of error, guessing 50, then 25, 37, or 42. That is the calculation of an engineer, a cold machine aiming to optimize the number of attempts. But when your opponent intentionally sets a trap, that logic becomes a self-inflicted wound. They know you will choose 50. They know you will drop to 25 and then move to 37. They place the number exactly where you least expect it. This game teaches us that strategy never lies in the numbers themselves, but in the minds of others. On a tropical island, as the world watched a survival game, a man who appeared to be a loser became the ultimate winner. When 3 people remained clinging to a wooden pole in the final challenge, he proactively stepped down, a decision that defied instinct but was wiser than any calculation. Had he tried to hold on until the end, he would have been forced to eliminate an ally, thereby losing trust and a crucial vote in the final hour. By conceding the physical contest, he shifted the burden of elimination to someone else, preserved his image of loyalty, and quietly secured his spot in the final. In that faint loss, he found the only path to true victory. Sports fans are often mesmerized by a player making several consecutive shots, calling it the hot hand as if magic were at work. However, researchers have shown that such streaks are often an illusion, much like a series of heads or tails in a coin toss. Yet, one fact remains: when the defense concentrates its force to block a star, teammates find more opportunities to shine. Heat does not reside only in an individual's hand, but spreads through the entire collective. A star may sacrifice their own statistics to lift the team to a new level. This paradox can only be understood by looking at the game as a whole. This paradox is also vividly exposed in prestigious boat races. The leader is often forced to copy every move of the follower. Why would the person in the lead resign themselves to being an imitator? Because in boat racing, the margin of victory is irrelevant. Crossing the finish line first is all that matters. If the follower changes direction, the leader must immediately mirror them, even if it is a less efficient route. The safety of maintaining that narrow gap is worth more than any display of creativity. This rule extends far beyond the water. In the business world, Giants often act this way, rarely risking innovation themselves, but instead waiting for a smaller player to experiment before copying their success. Maintaining a leading position sometimes requires accepting a secondary role in creativity. Elsewhere, a man was once brought before a powerful council and pressured to retract his views. He shook his head and declared, "Here I stand, I can do no other." That stubbornness ignited a great reformation. Centuries later, a general used that same intransigence to force world powers to concede. When he said no, all of Europe was forced to listen. The irony was that he lacked a powerful army. His only weapon was his refusal to compromise. By turning a refusal into an irreversible commitment, he left his opponents with only two choices: accept his terms or face total collapse. But stubbornness has a dark side. When it turns into blindness, it can drive a massive project into ruin. Much like the visionary who dreamed of a transcontinental canal but was defeated by disease. In overcommitment, strategy lies in knowing when to become a stone wall and when to take a step back to survive. In a Manhattan television studio, a middle-aged woman stood trembling in a bikini she hadn't dared to wear since her youth. This very embarrassment was the commitment device she chose to secure her own escape. If she failed to lose 15 pounds in the next 2 months, these photos would be broadcast nationwide. This wasn't a challenge of nutritional knowledge she already knew about calories and diets. It was a game played against her future self. Current me bound future me so tightly that there was no room for betrayal. Much like an ancient general burning his boats to leave his soldiers with no choice. But to move forward, the most powerful strategy is often not having more options, but cutting off all avenues of retreat. At another chessboard, where there are neither soldiers nor sailboats, but congressional votes, a shrewd investor proposed an absurd plan. He suggested that if a financial reform bill failed, an anonymous billionaire would donate $1 billion to the faction that supported it most. The result was pre-programmed. No faction dared to oppose the bill, fearing they would hand a massive advantage to their rivals. Both sides were forced to agree. The anomaly here is that to achieve a collective benefit, it is sometimes necessary to place parties in a situation they fear most. Using that fear to compel cooperation, the game of rock, paper, scissors might seem like child's play, yet it once decided the fate of an art collection worth $18 million. The leading auction houses agreed to determine a winner with those 3 simple moves. The truth hidden behind that game is a profound lesson. Never let yourself become predictable. Whoever reveals a pattern loses. To gain an edge, one must break habits and sow doubt. In a world where every action is observed, seemingly meaningless randomness becomes the ultimate armor. In the world of gambling, a veteran once advised his child, when someone offers a hand with an expression of overconfidence, never accept. You will only meet disaster. Bets between financial players are no different. If someone invites you to buy a futures contract, remember that your gain is their loss. Why would they offer that deal unless they believe they held a guaranteed win? Strategy here lies in alertness. Do not let yourself be turned into prey. But that same environment also hides another paradox: to persuade others to enter a bet. Sometimes you must show them that you are also prone to losses and lapses. Sustainable victory cannot come from an aura of invincibility, but from making the opponent believe you can be defeated. Then, when night fell on the crowded streets of Jerusalem, a taxi ride turned into a life-and-death chess match. Two American guests thought they could bargain after they were already settled in the back seat, attempting to exploit the last-mover advantage over the driver. With his pride wounded, the driver locked the doors and sped off recklessly. He threw them out onto the street over a difference of a few cents. In that game, reason was swept away by emotion, and cold strategy suddenly became illusory. The lesson was not about a few coins, but a bitter truth. Humans are not perfect calculating machines. Pride, anger, or the feeling of being insulted can overturn any script. As this series of disjointed stories closes, an invisible thread emerges. Wherever there are humans, there are strategic games, from a secret number, a television program, or a football match, to a parliament, a laboratory, or a shabby taxi. All are chessboards where we are forced to both calculate and feel. Strategy is not always the sharp weapon of reason. It can also be a humble gesture, stubbornness, fear, or even a joke. And within these paradoxes, the art of strategic thinking gradually reveals itself. Two men sit in separate rooms, forbidden from communicating. They have just been arrested, and the police are seeking a confession. Each faces a choice: remain silent or defect, inform on the accomplice. If both remain silent, they will only receive a light sentence. If one person betrays while the other stays silent, the traitor goes free while the other serves a heavy sentence. However, if both betray, both receive a moderately heavy sentence. This game has entered history as the symbol of the prisoner's dilemma. The paradox lies in the fact that individual rationality always leads each person toward betrayal. Regardless of whether one trusts the other, the safest path for oneself is still to confess. When both are equally rational in this way, the final result is the worst-case scenario for both. That game reflects thousands of real-life situations. To companies both want to keep prices high, but fear the competitor will lower them. To nations want to reduce weapons, but neither dares to go first. To friends want to keep a secret, but each fears being sold out. From this, we begin to understand that cooperation is never a given. It must be nurtured and reinforced by trust or by binding mechanisms. In an old village, people once faced the problem of belling the cat. Everyone knew that if the cat wore a bell, the mice would be safer, but no one wanted to be the one to risk stepping forward. Individual rationality pushed the collective into a state of helplessness. Conversely, there are times when humans find ways to break that stalemate. One of the most powerful tools is repetition. When the game occurs not just once, but many times in succession, immediate betrayal is no longer the optimal choice because the price to be paid is the loss of future cooperation. When the companies know they will encounter each other in the market for many years, they are willing to maintain prices together because any price cutting today will trigger retaliation tomorrow, but repetition is not enough. Sometimes credible commitments are needed, a contract, a monitoring system, or even a bond of honor. Some small communities rely on social punishment to maintain trust. Anyone who betrays will be boycotted and lose face on a larger scale. Nations sign treaties and establish international organizations to turn promises into obligations. In all these ways, we see a truth. Trust itself is fragile, but trust reinforced by mechanisms can stand firm. Sometimes, just a slight shift in perspective is enough to change the situation. Imagine again the two people in the interrogation room. If they view that game as a one-time event, they will betray. But if they believe this is just one battle in a long life, that even behind bars, they must still rely on each other, they will remain silent. The change here is not in the police rules, but in the time frame the players choose. It is the way we look at the future that determines our actions in the present. The prisoner's dilemma teaches us a bitter lesson. Knowing the collective interest does not guarantee it will be achieved. On the contrary, the pursuit of individual interest often pushes everyone into a deep hole. To escape that paradox, we must learn to build bridges through repetition, constraints, and trust. In many games, humans do not need promises or contracts yet still find a stable stopping point. This strange phenomenon was first revealed in mathematics and then spread to all fields of life. It is called an equilibrium, Nash equilibrium, where no player can unilaterally deviate to improve their own outcome. Imagine the tennis players standing at the net. Each must choose to hit left or right without knowing the opponent's choice. If both constantly change direction out of habit, one side will eventually guess correctly and win. Then, a strange state appears. Each person begins to mix their shots randomly, following no discernible pattern. At that very point of uncertainty, both reach equilibrium. No one can gain an advantage by guessing the opponent's move. This equilibrium does not exist only in sports. In business, companies also often unconsciously enter such situations. Each firm chooses its price, output, and promotional strategy until it realizes that any unilateral change would make it worse off. That is the point where they stop. An equilibrium is not necessarily perfect, but it is stable enough to maintain the game. What makes this equilibrium beautiful is not just the precise calculation, but the paradox it carries. No one needs to coordinate or be forced to follow, yet everyone quietly finds a stopping point. In a chaotic world, order sometimes arises from the very selfishness of each individual. However, this equilibrium is not always a desirable result. There are equilibria that lead to poverty, injustice, or stalemate. For example, in a city where everyone chooses to drive during peak hours, no one benefits. Yet no one dares to change their commute time for fear of being the only one to suffer. The equilibrium here is real, but it only reinforces waste. The art of strategy, therefore, lies not only in recognizing equilibrium, but also in knowing how to break it when necessary. As we close, we look back at the journey we have taken, from trivial everyday games to complex political dilemmas, from betrayal to trust, From individual calculation to collective equilibrium, we begin to see that strategic games are not dry math problems on paper, but the lifeblood woven into every daily decision. Sometimes we win by losing. Sometimes we protect ourselves by tying our own hands. Sometimes we cooperate only because we fear losing more. And sometimes we stop at a point that no one desires, yet no one can escape. That is the true art, seeing an underlying order within the chaos and understanding that every move, however small, is linked to others in an invisible web. Once you recognize this, you will no longer look at the world with naive eyes, but through the lens of a player in a game that never ends. On a tennis court, the most tense moment occurs when an athlete prepares to serve. The audience sees a seemingly simple shot either to the left or to the right, but in the player's mind, it is a maze of probabilities. If one direction is repeated, the opponent will read the play. If the direction changes according to a predictable pattern, the opponent will notice. The only way to survive is to embrace uncertainty. The server must learn to inject randomness into every shot, turning themselves into an unknown variable. This sounds paradoxical, a strategy rooted in chance. In truth, however, that intentional randomness is where the power lies. The penalty kicker in football faces the same challenge. At a distance of only 11 meters, the goalkeeper and the player become to minds guessing each other's intent. If the player always shoots into a favorite corner, the goalkeeper will dive correctly. If the goalkeeper always lunges to one side, the player scores easily. Therefore, both must learn a mixed strategy, sometimes left, sometimes right, sometimes straight down the middle. Every decision is guided not just by muscle, but by the calculus of probability. At the negotiation tables of large corporations, this rule remains ever present. If a company always chooses the same pricing strategy, its competitors will easily adjust to eliminate them. But if they know how to mix strategies, sometimes lowering prices to intimidate, sometimes holding steady to stabilize, the opponent loses the ability to predict their next move. What we call randomness here becomes a sophisticated tool for control. However, humans are often poor at dealing with probability. We easily fall for the hot hand fallacy, becoming overly optimistic after a win or too pessimistic after a loss. The mind perceives patterns in random noise, creating an illusion of order. In that illusion, we make our greatest mistakes. True strategy requires discarding precarious intuition to see the world through the dry numbers. That dictates survival. Some have turned uncertainty into a shield in political negotiations. One side might declare, "We may react in many ways. No one knows for sure." It is that very ambiguity that makes the opponent hesitate to act recklessly. Much like a seasoned poker player, one must occasionally reveal a losing hand so that others believe they are vulnerable, only to strike suddenly when the stakes are high. Uncertainty, when controlled, is the most dangerous strategy of all. Yet randomness is not always the solution. Sometimes it only obscures our vision. For instance, a manager who constantly shifts policies to keep employees guessing may create chaos instead of strength. The art lies in knowing when to sow uncertainty and when to provide a straight path. Balancing chaos and order, that is the true skill of the strategist. Long ago, a general leading his troops across the sea ordered all the boats to be burned. The soldiers were shocked to find no way back, but in a moment, they understood their only choice was to fight to the end. That ruthless act was a strategic masterpiece of cutting off one's own retreat. The general turned fear into strength in a life and death game. It is not only about how you act on the chessboard, it is about how you shape the board from the beginning. Sometimes, people provide a deposit to prove their determination. A business promises to launch a new product, but only when it has built an expensive production line does that promise become credible. The capital spent acts as an anchor, preventing them from turning back. The opponent sees this and understands that the declaration is not merely empty rhetoric. Similarly, changing the game can involve creating a trap for others. Imagine two competing firms. One announces that if the opponent lowers prices, they will retaliate by lowering them even further, accepting losses to destroy the rival. This statement only carries weight if they have proven a willingness to suffer in the past, or have the reserves to back it up. This is not a game of simple intimidation. It is a message carved in action. The political world has seen many such moves. A leader once declared, "We will consider any small attack as the start of total war." If these were just words, no one would believe them. But when troops are deployed and weapons are placed on high alert, the threat becomes a reality hanging over the opponent's head. Power here lies not in the voice, but in the terrible cost of reneging on one's word. The paradox is that to take the initiative, you must often limit your own freedom. You bind yourself to a single path so that others no longer doubt your intent. Like a negotiator who offers a final price and insists, "I will go no further." If the opponent truly believes he cannot change his mind, they must operate within that frame. These predetermined moves turn declarations into irreversible realities, locking oneself in to force others to recalculate. This is often the only way to transform a weak position into a position of strength. There is a thin but decisive gap between empty words and a credible commitment. Anyone can utter a threat, but the opponent will weigh whether the speaker has the reason, the ability, and the courage to follow through. If the answer is no, the threat falls into a void. In a trade dispute, a company once threatened to sue anyone who copied its designs. At first, no one cared because they lacked a legal track record. However, once they built a dedicated legal team and aggressively pursued small cases to the end, everything changed. The cost of litigation was now a factor everyone had to consider. Prior investment turned a hollow threat into a credible deterrent. Finally, parties sometimes use a hostage mechanism in international trade, posting a bond or handing assets to a third party to ensure compliance. If they betray the agreement, they are the first to suffer. The paradox of trust is that to be believed, you must place yourself in danger. The strongest commitment is often the one that goes against your own short-term interest. Reputation, too, is a form of commitment. A leader known for doing more than they say becomes a strategic asset. Their word alone acts as a deterrent. Conversely, frequent empty threats erode all power. In the end, the collective memory of others is the mechanism that forces you to keep your word. There are even times when people bind themselves with rigid, unwavering rules. A government passes regulations to ensure central bank independence, preventing politicians from printing money arbitrarily. By strategically abdicating their own power, they actually gain a position of strength in negotiations. The opponent knows the driver cannot change the law at will. Binding oneself, paradoxically, creates the ultimate credibility. However, credibility and binding mechanisms also carry the seeds of danger. Once you have built an image of never yielding, you risk falling into the very trap you created. To protect a hard-won reputation, people may escalate into unnecessary conflicts. A credible threat requires not only the strength to act, but also the wisdom to know when to stop. By understanding this distinction, we see that strategy is not just about clever words. It is about building an entire architecture that gives those words weight. In the real world, only those brave enough to trade money, time, honor, or even safety can truly be believed. True strategy is the art of designing the context, where each action carries weight not because of its immediate benefit, but because of how it shapes the entire game thereafter. On the sports field, the player understands that uncertainty is their shield. In business, the entrepreneur knows how to burn bridges or post a bond so that others are left with no choice but to cooperate. In politics, the leader understands that credibility turns words into a force no one dares to underestimate. These three seemingly disjointed streams merge into a common language, the language of human interaction. It is for this reason that the academic world has awarded its most prestigious honors to those who paved this path. One mathematician, John Nash, proved that in every game, no matter how complex, there exists an equilibrium point, a state where no player can unilaterally improve their situation. Reinhard Selten expanded this to games with imperfect information, while John Harsanyi analyzed how we guess the motives of others. Later, researchers demonstrated how infinitely repeated games open the door for long-term cooperation, showing that threats and binding, commitments, things that may seem irrational, are actually the keys to understanding war and peace. The Nobel Prize has recognized these thinkers as milestones on a journey of discovery. Harsanyi, Nash, and Selten in 1994, followed by Robert Aumann and Thomas Schelling in 2005. They showed that cooperation arises not just from kindness, but from calculated repetition. Looking from afar, we see a beautiful paradox. Dry mathematical models on paper touch the very depths of human existence. Ultimately, we now possess a framework rather than just disjointed concepts. We know when to inject randomness, when to burn bridges, and when to put our honor on the table. In a world where information is a weapon, hidden, distorted, or partially revealed, we must look for costly signals. In a business acquisition, a buyer looks for signs that are hard to fake: the seller's willingness to accept additional costs or invest personal capital. Only someone who truly believes in the future dares to pay such a price. Information asymmetry also exists in the rituals of closed groups. Harsh initiation rites act as a screening mechanism. Only those with a high level of commitment will endure the meaningless pain. This is a bitter truth. Sometimes useless costs are the only true measure of loyalty. Without common knowledge, what everyone knows that everyone else knows, a collective is prone to disastrous decisions. A group may follow a failing path simply because no one dares to break the silence. To counter this, we design mechanisms like private auctions or sophisticated tax systems that force information to the surface, making honesty more profitable than deception. Finally, coordination often requires an implicit scaling point or focal point. If two friends must meet in a vast square without a phone, they might both instinctively stand under the central clock. Fairness often acts as a scaling point. A 50-50 split is frequently chosen not because it is perfect, but because it is the most prominent point of agreement. However, coordination requires more than just a focal point. It requires trust. The stag hunt dilemma illustrates this. Alone, a hunter can only catch a rabbit, but together, they can take down a stag. If even one person doubts the group, the entire endeavor collapses to the lowest level. Strategy, then, is the bridge we build across the chasm of doubt. There are even fiercer games, where each side snarls and rushes straight at each other, like two cars speeding on a collision course. In this chicken game, the first to swerve loses and the most stubborn wins. When trust vanishes, it is replaced by a raw display of resolve. The arms races of history and the escalation of modern disputes all carry this dangerous undertone. Once trust is gone, victory belongs to the one who dares to prove they are ready to destroy both sides. To avoid such a catastrophe, people often cling to symbols, a flag, a ritual, or a customary rule. These become the fragile threads that prevent a collective from disintegrating. In chaos, humans desperately need a focal point to align their steps. But coordination is not just theoretical. It is tied to every financial decision. When expectations meet real capital, the rules of the game sharpen, giving rise to auction floors, arenas where trust, rivalry, and even illusions are transformed into market value. On an auction floor, it is easy to assume the winner is the smartest person in the room. The truth, however, is often the opposite. The winner frequently overpays, falling into the trap known as the winner's curse. In a crowded room, the price climbs from hundreds to thousands. Each nod from a participant is more than just a bid. It is a declaration. I believe the true value is even higher in the end. The most persistent bidder risks buying regret at an exorbitant price. Auctions permeate modern life, from football broadcasting rights and telecommunications licenses to coveted school spots for children. Each format dictates its own strategy: public bidding, sealed bids, or reverse auctions where the price drops until someone bites. When the rules change, so does human behavior. The wise player knows not only the value of the prize, but also the exact nature of the playground they stand upon. Yet money does not always set the rules. In many negotiations, patience is the most lethal weapon. Consider a hotel with only one room and two people who both value it at $100. Each day that passes without an agreement is a lost opportunity for both. The one in a hurry will suffer. The one with enough patience can squeeze the price. However, if both remain equally stubborn, they ruin the opportunity for everyone. The lesson: advantage comes not just from what you want, but from how long you can endure the waiting. In major deals, the anchor effect is a formidable power. The first to speak risks revealing their hand, but setting the initial number anchors the entire negotiation around that point. Even in objecting, the opponent is pulled into the orbit of that starting figure. Negotiation is thus a complex intertwining of mathematics, psychology, and intuition. In long-term relationships, a missed beat today can be corrected tomorrow. Yielding now may allow you to demand more later. Many negotiations are not single sessions, but a series of movements, where each side maintains discipline while carving a path for compromise. When the rules expand to a collective, the game shifts from individual patience to the design of incentives and voting structures. There are times when the fate of a decision rests not on logic, but on the voting procedure. Centuries ago, thinkers pointed out a paradox: when a collective chooses by majority, the result can cycle endlessly. A beats B, B beats C. But C beats A. This means whoever controls the agenda controls the outcome. Voting is a strategic game, no less intense than a high-stakes negotiation. Candidates do not just present views. They calculate how to split votes, form coalitions, and frame questions to their advantage. In this structure, citizens may believe they are expressing their will, but they often become pawns in a much larger design. Deeper still, daily life is governed by the principal-agent problem. The boss wants performance, but cannot supervise every second. The employee wants comfort, but fears job loss. To bridge this gap, we build systems of salary, audits, and rewards. Yet, a paradox emerges. The reward itself can ruin the motivation. A teacher paid by the number of tests graded may sacrifice quality for quantity. A doctor rewarded for the volume of surgeries may operate unnecessarily. Misguided incentives turn noble goals into disastrous consequences. The art of strategy here is incentive design, linking the interests of the agent with those of the principal to ensure long-term sustainability. To conclude, we return to the reality of the game. We see auctions where prices escalate into madness, like the dollar auction where every step forward leads deeper into a hole. These stories serve as a mirror, allowing us to see ourselves in the theory. We learn how information is concealed, how to coordinate or disrupt, how to negotiate, and how to incentivize. But the most profound truth is this: every human relationship is a game. In this game, the wise person is not the one who wins every single round, but the one who masters the long-term rhythm. Know when to be firm and when to be flexible. Know when to employ strategic ambiguity to protect yourself, and when to build the trust that sustains us. What haunts me most after exploring this book is a single question. Do we truly see the world as a game, or are we merely being swept along in matches that others have already laid out? If every nod, every purchase, every vote, and every promise is a move, how many times have we played without even knowing we were on the board? The lesson is not always win or always cooperate. It is more subtle. Know when to limit your own freedom to make a commitment credible. Know when reputation is worth more than immediate gain. Strategy, ultimately, is not about the tools we hold, but about our daring to face the ultimate paradox. To be free, we must limit ourselves. To win big, we must sometimes accept a loss. To build trust, we must accept the risk of being vulnerable. I leave you with this: in the games you play every day at the family table, in the office, or within your community, will you choose to be swept along? Or will you be the one who stops to see the full picture and walks forward with intention? Thank you for accompanying me to the very end of this journey. I hope these strategic pieces live on in every choice you make. See you in our next exploration, where we will continue to decode the many games of life. For now, the book vibe says goodbye and see you again.